Today's show might be my favorite of the entire year. We start out slow, but by the end, I wish it could have gone on forever. We meet with Chris Snyder of banks.com. We discuss his evolution in working with this domain, the process of acquiring it, intense amounts of negotiation, creative problem solving, so many pieces of very valuable insight. Talks about banks.com itself, the execution struggles that he's had, what he's learned along the way, and a lot of conversation surrounding deal structure and how buying this domain name fundamentally changed his entire business model. Super, super interesting show. Enjoy.
FD was built by domain investors to increase your inquiries, sales, and profit. Forget spreadsheets and archived emails. Manage your entire investment portfolio in one place using a secure and completely confidential platform. Learn more at FT.com. That's EFTY, FT.com.
Hey, Sherpa Network. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Tess Diaz, executive producer of DomainSherpa.com. And today we're bringing in a very interesting founder with quite the story. Welcome, Chris Snyder, president of marketing agency Jewel, and also founder of banks.com. How you doing, Chris?
Doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to. And Andrew Rosner, CEO of MediaOptions.com. He really specializes in global valuation of domain names, but also is a serial entrepreneur and founder himself. So welcome to the show, Drew.
Thank you, Tess.
Delighted to have you. And this is going to be a really interesting story. So much of our audience are domain investors and are very interested to hear how you acquired a what we call an exact match domain, right? What people are searching for are banks, and banks.com exactly matches what they're searching for, but also how you came to value that and proceed with an acquisition without much of a background in the domain world. So why don't we start just real briefly about your back. You have, I believe, some finance background, and then you entered the marketing world?
Yeah, so I'll go really fast here. I started my career in the mid-90s at a small computer company called Gateway. Cow-spotted boxes. Computers were, 286, 386, 486. They finally turned into Pentiums when I worked there, but there was no laptops. They were $7,000 computers. There was no CD-ROMs. I think we sold one of the first CD-ROMs. It was Gateway and Dell all the way. So that's where I got started, and I got started in.
Sorry to interrupt you, but all that is old is cool again. You saw that Walmart just launched, basically relaunched Gateway.
Yeah, I did not see that, but I see.
It's like I think it's like the number one selling computer since it launched.
Yeah, listen, that in Walmart, by the way, I just bought a good bit of their stock too. I think really they're probably the only people that can compete with Amazon. They're not going to do real damage, but as far as market share, Walmart is doing all the right things, and I believe in that brand. And the Gateway brand is strong too, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so that was all hardware, right? And then as I looked at my commission checks, they kept going down and down and down, and computers went from $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, and you're selling, $30 million a month in hardware to, $900 a computer, right? And you're just trying to eke it out. So I moved into services. I worked for, some consulting firms and got really heavy into software and services. And then I wound up in 2005 moving out to LA to take a job at a company called LowerMyBills.com, which was bought by Experian for about $300 million. I had nothing to do with really any of their success. I will say that. I mean, they sold the company 3 months after I got there. And I was like, well, that kind of sucks because I took a swing and I made $900. $900. That's what I made. So So in 2005, I learned about advertising, performance marketing, and specifically lead gen in the financial services space. We were doing, tens of millions of dollars a month in revenue. We were spending at least $100 million a year online. And what I learned was, wow, there's like a lot of demand, consumer demand back then. This was before the financial crisis in 2008. I mean, they were basically giving anybody a mortgage, right? So subprime was hot, AmeriQuest was hot, Countrywide was hot. All these guys were just giving away mortgages, and then the whole thing imploded, right? I literally walked into my office one day and my boss said, "Hey, could I talk to you?" And literally pulled me into a room, and there was HR sitting there. This was August of 2008. And he was like, "You got to go." Right? So I literally came home with my shit in a box. Like I was in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
They literally stood at my desk to make sure I didn't take anything. I didn't have anything anyway. And I had a BlackBerry phone. It had all my contacts on it. They watched me load everything up. And by the time I hit the elevators, my BlackBerry phone was wiped. I couldn't even call anyone because I didn't have any phone numbers. Oh. And my wife and I, we were living in Malibu at the time. And I drove home and she was like, "What are you doing home?" I'm like, "I just got laid off." She says, "Well, what are you going to do?" So I'm going to go paddleboarding. So I literally went paddleboarding for like a month, like 6 or 7 hours a day, just, freeing up my mind.
Yeah.
So, good for you. I have a quick question. So lowermybills.com is also what we would consider an exact match domain. It's something someone is, worrying probably during those exact times and typing it in. Were you aware of the connection between the lead generation they were doing and the advantage that they had with a domain name like that, or domains just weren't on the radar?
I had no idea. I came from an enterprise software and hardware background where I had numbers they were like, "Hey, you own this territory and you need to build $2 million in this territory in software and services. And if you can't do that, you're basically fired," right? And you ran around on airplanes. This was before 9/11. You dressed up in suits and you put your shirt on and your tie on and you went in there and you fucking sold this stuff. And if you hit your number, you made 200 grand. And if you missed your number, you got fired. Internet, I knew what the internet was, but when I looked at what was going on at Lower My Bills, when I got there, I was like, wait a second. You guys buy something, basically, you buy a lead in general. You're buying something for $20 and you're selling it for $250 and you're doing that 500,000 times a month.
Yeah.
What the fuck is going on here? What's going on here? So I just dove in really, and I was on the sales side. So I had the banks, right? I had the mortgage brokers, and our job as business development or the sales teams was to sell them leads.
And at that time, it was really just a wild west. I mean, there's very little, quality scoring on those leads, and there's no compliance. I mean, people were selling the leads to 15 or 50, 500 different buyers. And,
I will say, I mean, I think of all the companies out there, Experian runs a really tight shop, and I don't think they would have given us the time of day if we were pulling all the shenanigans that you both know go on in this business. But we had a returns department, and if people weren't happy, we checked everything. We only sold the leads as many times as we said we would. We didn't resell data. We had a high quality product, which at the time made sure that we kind of dominated the marketplace until 2008 hit, of course.
Yeah. Kind of neat to see how it's building here. So you start out in the hardware, then software as a service, then now you happen to be specializing in a region with banks. I'm not sure how paddleboarding fits in. Truly, I think anyone who has the time, the creativity of downtime can be really valuable for your next steps. So what was your next step?
Well, so I came home with my shit in a box, as I most affectionately say. And my wife had already, and her and I actually worked together at Lower My Bills. She had already started the agency, which is Jewel. And this was in 2008. And And I just said, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to chill out. Like this is, and by the way, I've lost multiple jobs. You know, I'm not
Not your first rodeo.
No, I've probably been shit canned like 6 or 7 or 8 times. Like it's not a big deal, but I just didn't, but at this point I was like, 2008, I was like 32 years old or something. And I'd been working since I was like 18 in professional businesses doing this work. And I was just kind of sick of it. You know, I was like, so I'm paddleboarding and one day I come home, she's like, how long are you going to do this? Really? Like, because you got to do something.
Okay, so sorry. I got another question. So you said she'd already founded Jewel. Was she still working at Lower My Bills, or she had also gotten laid off at this point?
No, she had left. Well, she had left a year prior because she's smarter than me. She saw the writing on the wall.
And so she was exclusively doing the marketing agency.
Yeah, so she left like a year prior and she started her own business. And again, it was hot. Like anyone that understood how to do this work was, in high demand. In high demand, for sure.
Yeah.
So she was already cranking. She already had, 10 employees maybe. We were working out of our house. These people were coming into our house. This was pre-kids. We had 4 bedrooms. We had 2 of them were offices, right? We literally were letting people in our home to do work. But I went on a couple interviews, cars.com, and there was a myriad of these lead gen. I actually interviewed at Quinn Street. I talked to Lead Point. These are all names that are circular in our business. And I had no desire to have another boss. I just couldn't, I'm just not very employable that way. So she's like, well, why don't you help me out? And so I started making phone calls, and I don't know, what is it, 2021? I don't even know what year it is, but here I am still cranking away, literally doing online marketing since 2005, 2006, sales, marketing, strategic planning, media buying, email, analytics. Like there's probably not content, not too much I don't know about this space at this point. So
what's so funny to me is, I think our audience sees it clearly. You're banks.com today. You own banks.com. And, when we bring a domain investor on who has developed a business on one of their domain names, it's domain first. Everything is domain first. You've been telling your story. I don't think banks.com has come out of your mouth yet. And, I think I just have to laugh. I think that's really funny in the difference in priority and perspective. You look at it and say, look, I've got banks.com, and I'll let you tell that story. But it's like, I've got banks.com, I'm building a business. You're not even talking about the brand. You're not even talking about, hey, I got banks.com. It's I'm doing content. I'm doing this marketing. You're doing the same shit you've been doing.
That's right.
Just happens to be today on banks.com and for yourself.
Yeah.
And for the parts of our audience who are domain investors who want to sell to an end user, I think it's really valuable to hear you're basically who much of our audience would be selling to. And to hear your perspective, you can't sell to someone when your approach
I don't
is opposite of their priority. Okay, what do you think?
No. Chris is actually like sort of the man in the middle. Chris is, which is always a difficult place to be, neither black nor white, you're gray. And not a domain investor, not necessarily the end user. You're trying to compete against the ultimate end users, and you're using a strategic brand, a strategic domain name in order to get a leg up, in order to be able to compete as a David against the Goliath. And so that's the story, right? And that's who you are. But you wouldn't necessarily be the end user that would buy, that, and I could be wrong, but you're not going to pay the same price that a typical end user would pay for a domain name. If I understand correctly, I think, you ended up in banks.com opportunistically.
That's right.
Which is different than, being an end user and then somebody coming to you with the right domain for your market this was a purely opportunistic play that fed into the skills you already possess. How did you end up with banks.com?
Yeah. So, and by the way, that's a good lens. I consider myself an entrepreneur, and just if I'm good at something, I'll just say, oh, well, that seems like a good fit. And since I'm already doing it, it's a good fit. So let's go do it. I don't rummage around the internet looking for different things to do generally.
So many people try to put themselves in a box and say, well, but this is what I am. This is what I do. And then they lose those opportunities that come knocking on their door so scarcely that if you don't take advantage of them, you're going to wait till the next one comes, and it could be a while.
Yeah.
And so that's such an important lesson, I think, for people in general. It's just like, be open to opportunity, be flexible. Nobody says, oh, you're a domain investor. Nobody says that tomorrow, you're not in the, McDonald's franchise business, or that you're in the banks.com business, or that whatever. You got to just be, know as little, know as much about as many things as you possibly can, and then see the opportunities when they come up. So sorry.
Yeah. No, it's really, for me, I've always had the ability to see opportunities in different ways. And so and it's probably because I've done so many exploratory calls over the last 25 years, and I've been consultative selling, right?
Yeah.
So you don't sell a service. These are not pens and you can only have red, white, and blue, right? That's not what I've done. My whole entire career, even going back to Gateway, has been, you can create this computer made to order, right?
Yeah, bespoke.
Yeah. So I've always looked at things like, okay, where's the market opportunity? How big is it? How hard do I have to try? Row fast can we go? So this leads in nicely to the banks.com story. So I was at a client in Roseland, New Jersey, because our agency, basically we took the same performance models that, my wife and I had learned over many years doing performance marketing. When I say performance marketing, we didn't charge for results. We were basically an extension of their team. We charged a retainer. But we saw that what we were doing in consumer at Lower My Bills was not being done in B2B. Like B2B was much further behind. And we basically took the frameworks and said, well, why don't we do this for B2B? Because there's not a lot of people doing it and we're really good at it. So we kind of flipped from D2C to B2B, and our agency took off, and the rest is kind of history. But I was at a payroll company in Roseland, New Jersey, and I was having meetings, and we were doing a lot of launching new products with their innovation center and doing very entrepreneurial things. And I went back to the city to stay, because who stays in Roseland, New Jersey? I've done it once. I will never do it again. Sorry.
Dirty jurors.
Dude, it's just like, if you want to stay in a strip mall and just stare out the window at nothing, it's a great place to go. So I went back into the city. And the reason why I went back into the city is because one of my buddies who does advertising for Verizon, he worked at Samsung, Xbox, him and I are good friends. He was like, hey, we're going to hook up. This is like college buddies. Hey, we're going to hook up. But then he like ditched me. So I'm in the city with literally nothing to do, but I've got contacts. So I call a couple buddies. I'm like, what are you doing? And they said, hey, come to this party. Come to this agency party. And I'm like, I don't want to go to some dumbass agency party. This is a terrible idea. He's just like, oh, it's free drinks. And I don't like a lot of those in general, just milling around, getting pitched by people and rubbing shoulders with people and dressing up. I don't really like it. But I went. And so I met the chief revenue officer for a publicly held company that owned a lot of very high value domains, right? We hit it off. I told him my story. He's like, oh, you're more of a, data analytics. You guys focus on not just creating banner ads and putting them on the internet. Like, I'm like, no, that's kind of dead. So he called me back the next week. We started talking, and I said, look, I'm looking at your portfolio in the holding company, and you've got banks.com. What are you guys doing with this thing? He's like, I don't know. I go, well, I can tell you, I'm looking at it. It looks like shit. I don't know who's working on it, but it's really bad. And at the time, it was a website focused on millennials, but this goes back probably 10 years. I realized through a lot of iterations with these guys that this thing's been bouncing around, right? So he's like, I don't know. Let me ask the CEO. It's kind of his baby. He loves it. He likes the domain. I don't think he wants to get rid of it. And I wasn't thinking about buying it really. I was just kind of like, why don't we work on this? You guys can fund it. Our agency will work on it. We're good at bringing things to life. And they came back and they said, well, given your background, why don't you put together a plan? By the way, I wasn't getting paid for this. They're like, why don't you put together a plan and then come out and pitch us and we'll see if we want to work on this thing together. And I'm like, well, so you mean as partners, I invest in it, I do all the work, you take half the EBIT, right? And yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I'm on it.
I'm in.
Fucking all over that. Let me do free work with a lot of risk while I have a whole bunch of other work to do, right?
But hold on. But to be fair, at that stage of your life, that wasn't the right opportunity. I would argue, however, and I believe that this will become more prominent in the future, that your abilities represent one cog in a beautifully running machine. And, with the guy that has the domain but doesn't have the skills, and you got another guy that's got the money but he doesn't have the skills, or the domain or anything else for that matter other than capital. And, we're very quickly going from a society that values capital higher above all else to a society that's going to value something else.
Expertise.
Might be labor, might be expertise, and we're going to see. It's probably knowledge, right? So I don't want to overly discount. I hear what you're saying, right? But I don't want to overly discount that opportunity because as easy it is for us to laugh at it and say, you're going to do all the work, take all the risk, and get half the EBIT. And we can laugh and say, that's a shit deal. For the kid with no capital, nothing to lose, no family, all the time in the world, and the right skill set, that is a dream in the making.
It's a great deal, yeah.
So, I agree with you. At your stage, your priorities, the whole thing, bad deal. But for the right guy at the right time of his life, that's an amazing deal. That's that's the kind of deal that Mark Ostrovsky, one of the first original domainers, these guys sold business.com for $8 million back in, I think it was 99, and it was, right before the pets.com thing blew up. And he wrote a book called here it is. Mike Snyder interviewed him a long time ago, but he wrote this book called Get Rich Click, and it's okay. It's not that great. Sorry, Mark, but it has a few ideas in there that are really good. And the underlying concept of a lot of the ideas is that there are so many opportunities now on the internet to build a business, make a profit without any capital and without taking any risk.
Yeah, true.
And so anyways, I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but I think that there is a large portion probably of our audience for which that may represent a tremendous deal to say, hey, I got banks.com. You know how to make this thing tick. Maybe there's somebody else that's got capital. Maybe it's your capital, whatever it might be. But here's the opportunity. And I think that is a great opportunity for some people.
I agree. Well, and honestly, you make a great point that I hadn't started considering until very recently. I actually evolved a lot during the point at which, so first of all, I'd never done a license deal with a publicly held company. I've done big contracts, but me being a cog in a wheel at a big Experian or whatever, you give it to the lawyers and you just walk away. And when they say no, it's no, right?
Yeah.
You have no culpability in the matter. But I literally started this I started the negotiation process in December of 2016. I literally inked the deal in July of 2017. It was a license deal. I did not at that point own the domain. And I would say that back to your point I may have, just given who I was as a business person at the time, may not have been as evolved as I am today. And I certainly would have done things a lot differently. Would have done things a lot differently. Right. So getting back to the evolution. So I have this thing, we do the deal, and literally our agency was doing well. So, I mean, we threw the house at it. I spent, probably $500,000 or $600,000 in less than a year, right? Just
in the development, the content, the SEO, the marketing,
everything. I mean, I probably spent $100,000 just in, Google AdWords by itself, right? But getting back to timing, back then there was no GDPR, there was no California privacy. The space, I think, although NerdWallet was a thing, they weren't as big of a thing as they are now. Penny Hoarder was a thing, but they weren't as big as a thing as they are now. There was lead gen companies that were still doing okay, but they were not doing near as well as they were doing in 2005, 2006.
This is 17, 18?
Yep. So I spent the first 6 months in development. So I would say we didn't get
I can say firsthand. It was like 2014, 15 was kind of the top of the mountain, or even earlier than that. But around there, it really fell off.
Andrew, we should have talked. We should have taled back then, because I wouldn't have spent the money that I've spent learning that the top of the mountain maybe had already come. But
I think we're headed up a new mountain now.
Yeah, we are. And candidly, I think that I'm hip to that. And I think I finally, after spending all my own time and all my own money and really getting the struggle, once you get the struggle, the brain activates and you really have to figure shit out. Or you go to bed every night and your wife goes, "What the fuck are you doing with our money?" Right?
Yeah.
She doesn't. She's very supportive. And candidly, she was all in on the domain from the very beginning. But
don't lie. She'd rather toast marshmallows with that money.
No, no way, man. She's an entrepreneur too. But look, at the end of the day, I spent, we didn't really get in market until 2018, right?
Before we get to 2018, so it took 8 months of negotiating just for the licensing. Was there anything?
I would say 6. Yeah.
Okay. Was there anything interesting in that process, or was it just lawyer? Or were there sticking points, challenges?
The interesting thing I learned was, and by the way, the CFO of that company, who doesn't work there anymore, him and I are still, he's an investment banker guy, super smart, really intense, but a straight up honest deal guy. Like, I would come with like reams of spreadsheets and models and cohorts and all the stuff that I understood. And he'd be like, "Dude, I'm not fucking looking at that. Like, just tell me what you're going to do. Tell me how you think it's going to go. We're going to make it really simple." Right. And it was a learning experience for me to work at someone at that level, and not some kind of other, kind of 3 or 4 levels down at a huge company that's just trying to grind you away into nothing. He was respectful. He was kind. He was, he gave me a lot of advice even throughout the process. Is like, "Look, and by the way, Chris, let me tell you what's going to happen here." He told me this straight up. He goes, "If you don't hit your numbers, I'm going to take this thing away from you. You realize that, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got it. I'm all in. There's no way I'm going to miss these numbers. No fucking way. I've never missed a number in my life." He's like, "It's going to be gone. I'm just telling you right now. We're not fucking around. Like, you miss your numbers. You took this risk. You're going to use your own money. We're going to take it away. I'm just saying. Someone's going to ask for the money. It's going to come. So you better hit your numbers." Right? So that's what I learned. So that was the first part, just getting the deal done. It took 6 months. It could have been done a month earlier, but these things take time. A couple trips out, presentations, right? The CRO, the chief revenue officer who I'd met at the party, he was instrumental in helping out as well. I felt like there was some camaraderie and team there. We were going into this. It was going to be hard work. It was going to be war, but we all believed we could do it. And it was fun. I enjoyed that process. And then there's operating a business where you're making all the decisions using all your own money. And you can't wake up and like with clients, it's easy. With clients, you could be like, oh, that guy's a dipshit. He told me to do something. I told him not to do it. I knew it wasn't going to work. It's his fault or it's her fault. Or they hired someone new and they're idiots. Like everybody's an idiot except for you, right? You're the smartest guy on the planet.
Easy to be a Sunday morning quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now after being at big companies and having a lot of success, mid-sized companies and startups, I've run the gamut, you know, doing our own agency and having success there. I was like, this is kind of, you know, we'll put 300 or 400 grand into this thing and it'll be singing. We'll get out of the agency business. We'll have a real company. Maybe this publicly held firm will buy it. Like I had it all figured out. It didn't work that way, clearly.
Or so you thought.
Yeah. I thought I had it all figured out. So we built all this stuff and immediately the first mistake I made was trying to do too much, right? Mm-hmm. Just had a bunch of tech people, you know, paying tech teams 20, 30 G's a month, you know, setting up all these APIs and all these connections. At the same time, I was spending, you know, $2,000 or $3,000 a contract to negotiate with, you know, big lead aggregation firms because I knew I couldn't get the banks fast enough. Yeah. So I basically have to grovel with, you know, the big lead aggregators. Some of them that you may know might be LendingTree or QuinStreet or Bankrate, Red Ventures. We talked about that a little earlier. So you just go and you gather up all this supply. And then if you're good at marketing, which we really thought we were, we could just go get consumers how we usually got them. We hook it up to the demand side, hook it up to the supply side. We've got banks.com. So that's going to be baller. Like we don't even have to work that hard relative to the other companies that have crappy domains that are completely unknown. Well, they didn't fucking work that way, candidly.
Yeah. Yeah. In the early days of the internet, it was, if you build it, they will come.
Yep.
And in today's internet, it's, if you build it, you know, that's step one.
Yeah. Tough lesson. Honestly, I thought the one good thing about the domain at the beginning, and I wanted to be careful with this, the one good thing about the domain at the beginning is anybody will take my call. Anyone and everyone.
Open stores. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Open stores.
But I'm also smart enough.
You're an absolute nobody on day one. And that's what it does. It opens doors. Yeah. It opens doors. And in the right hands, with the right capital behind it, you can run through those doors and get ahead of the competition. But that's, you know, that's the crux of the matter is, you know, if you're competing in a market with those types of competitors, you need a big checkbook.
Well, I played free safety in college and I really didn't ever consider that capital was going to be a problem because I figured I could do it. And that was naive. That was pretty fucking naive, right? So it was good. I mean, I'm not saying it negatively. There's been a lot of great lessons here. I've learned a lot. And, you know, thankfully from an investor standpoint, like I've learned on my own nickel. We've done a lot of great things. I've got a lot of good stories to tell. But at the end of the day, walking into a situation and thinking that you can just create something that's profitable with 500 grand in like an agency team in a year in this space, I didn't understand how long the contracts were going to take. I knew how long they would take, but I didn't think it would cost this much and it would be this onerous. The contracts took months, right? Like actually was in contract with Bankrate in 2018. They got bought by Red Ventures that year. I'd been through the entire negotiation process and they were like, guess what?
We just got sold.
Sorry.
Start again.
Now you're going to work with this other company. We're going to start the process over. And I was just like, fucking every day your offer isn't on my website. I lose money, guys. Like what? Just get me a piece of paper. Let's get this done. Right. So I didn't understand. And then GDPR hit, California privacy hit, and then all this regulatory stuff. I started really realizing now, being at Lower My Bills, being at Experian, they have teams of people that do that stuff.
Exactly.
Dude, I wasted my time and probably a third of my budget on bullshit. right?
Yeah.
Trying to do everything right. Right.
You invested a third of your time and money on making mistakes and learning.
Yeah.
With GDPR though, what you should have done is just straight up blocked all IPs outside of the United States.
Yeah.
Because your target market for banks.com, US traffic only. I would imagine, there may be a market for you to sell the European leads, UK leads, but whether or not you're even getting that traffic, I don't know. But
we are, and again, back to the lesson, right? The lesson, I'm like, this is a global fucking brand. Everybody knows what a bank is. Banks were started by some dude in Italy, 2,000 years ago or whatever. It's all documented. And candidly, I would say between 10 and 15% of our traffic comes from overseas. We don't monetize it. We don't really do anything with it. But
should have blocked it or redirected it, right? Find a partner overseas and say, look, we're going to just redirect all European IPs to you.
Yeah, something,
and,
right?
You give us a nickel.
Yeah, it didn't even matter. Just get away from the regulatory burdens. And again, another lesson, why are we trying to do so much when we don't have anything in retrospect?
Yeah.
We had $10 million. We had $500,000. We don't have a team. We don't have anything. So we built the domain. We started cranking away. I think the first year we did, I don't know, like $12,000 in revenue. And that was fine. I mean, I was okay with that. It was like, hey, we've got relationships. We're starting to grow. We're starting to move. But all this stuff started to happen. And then my partner, our licensed partner, they were getting impatient, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, you were actually supposed to do $300,000 this year, not $12,000. Just FYI, that's what the contract says.
Yeah.
So we were supposed to get half of your 300, so you owe us 150,000, basically, right? Or you're in violation of contract, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, that's fair. We talked about it. I did understand this.
Yes.
But I was like, well, look, it's not going to happen. I don't see any way we can do it. And besides, I'm putting my ass on the line here, and I'm investing everything, including the kitchen sink, into this. I'm working 15 hours a day, running. We got clients. I'm doing banks. I've got offshore teams doing all this crazy amounts of work. So that was a little frustrating. But then, they basically came back because they had other issues. They had distractions in other areas of their business because they weren't focused either, because they had a bunch of domains that didn't make sense to their core business. Banks.com was one of them. So they started to divest out of all these assets. So they called me one day and they were like, yo, man, Banks.com is for sale and you can buy it if you want, but unless you figure out a way to start, we go to these board meetings and we're telling everyone Banks.com is going to be a thing, but it's not there yet. So you can buy the domain or we're just going to take it back, right? And that was at this point, I'm like 750 in, right?
Wow.
With literally, nothing to show for it except for my MBA and whatever we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
It was a rough thing. And I was basically like, well, I don't have that kind of money because the price point was in the millions. It wasn't tens. It was below 5, but more than 2.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm not going to I'm done. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I was like, I don't know. You have to figure out what you guys are going to do. And then they came back, it was silent, almost dead silent for a month.
And did you press the stop button? So to stop the bleed, so to speak?
I didn't.
At that point, when you thought they were going to take it back, no? You kept going.
No, I didn't, because I felt like we were still hitting our milestones. But what I didn't know then and what I do know now is I've always been you always look at the bottom of where you're going. And if you're there, you're there. And if you're not, you're not. And that's kind of the way I've always looked at things. Did you hit your number?
What do you mean by the bottom of where you're going?
The profit number or the top line number.
Yeah.
You forget all the milestones in front of that. And you just look at the bottom and you go, am I there? No. Okay. Well, I guess we're fucked, right? It's but that's not really the right way to look at it, right? Because what I've learned over the last 3 years,
I guess it depends on your objectives and where you sit in the, in the deal.
Yeah. Well, I did not have any leverage. Let's put it that way. That would have been my only leverage. I had none. So yeah. And I was like, well, so let's try to see if we can do a couple more things here to show improvement in the trajectory. We're not going to hit that number. Let's just, everyone stop asking me for it. That was a number that was imagined in a spreadsheet a year ago. Clearly that's not going to happen. Let's readjust the number. Let's keep going, but let's look at what the progress we have made, right? Well, they were basically like, well, sorry, like we'll take another meeting. I flew out, I did another meeting. You know, we all like each other, but that's not the CEO of the company. That's not like the CFO. That's not the board of directors. That's not, they don't give a fuck. They're like, where's my money? Right?
Yeah.
So although my contacts were really nice, in the whole scheme of things, when you're working with a company that has shit to do,
money talks.
Yeah.
Maybe a more emotional question. So you're in the middle of this intense project and the rug gets essentially pulled out from under you, or is about to probably.
Yeah.
And I'm not really hearing anything about considering letting it go, considering giving up. You just said, let's communicate a little more. Let's acknowledge that the space is different than we wanted. Did you feel like this was the ultimate project for you? Did you feel like the momentum was just going and so you just didn't want it to stop? Why didn't you look more at walking away?
I always look in the mirror when these things happen. I always say, what is it that I am doing wrong? What is it that I personally am doing wrong? I'm in charge of this thing. I can't blame anyone. I've got all these people believing we can get this done. And there's something right in front of our face we're doing wrong. It's so simple. It's so stupid. And someday I'm going to kick myself for not seeing it sooner. Right.
So you felt like you were on the cusp of a revelation.
Yeah. You just keep trying, right? You just keep whittling away at it and grinding away at it. And for me, the only option to quit was they would have had to like pry it away from my cold, dead hands, honestly, because I just felt like we needed more time. I never changed the vision. I never changed, like, it's pretty fucking obvious what it is. We're not solving a market problem like Uber did. Uber basically said, we're going to reinvent taxi cabs. Banks.com is not reinventing anything. This is an execution problem. It needs time, it needs team, and it needs capital. It needs good leadership. There's a lot of things to this, which I've learned, obviously. Wouldn't have had the same conversation 2 or 3 years ago. But it was like, fuck, just give us some time. I'll figure it out. Because I always have. I've always figured it out. So no, there was never any point in time where I was like, all right, you guys can have it. It's just not part of my personality.
Super good for you. I mean, it's unusual. And I certainly would think that that's part of what made them proceed in what happened next.
Well,
so you flew out there. They took the meeting kind of like, last chance.
Yeah. So I really did what I believe to be a deep dive in education around the opportunity in the space, which is huge, right? The opportunity, if you think about the deposits in this country alone from the banks, it's $17 trillion. Let's be clear, right? So you don't have to go to a meeting and explain to any smart person that this is a big opportunity, right? You know, you don't have to go to a meeting and explain to someone that LendingTree does, about $1 billion a year in revenue. Their market cap is $4 billion. NerdWallet is a $500 million company, right? Quinn Street is a publicly held company. They're a $1 billion firm. Their market cap is similar to LendingTree's. I can give you 20 examples. Penny Hoarder went from 0 to 80 million. It took them 8 or 9 or 10 years, how long it's been taking them. But it depends on what kind of company you want to be. It is there for the taking. It is, to Drew's point earlier, it is undercapitalized, right? It needs focus and it needs capital. It needs the right team, right? So I went out there. I basically gave them all the fintech and all the banking metrics, all the stuff that we've been talking about. And they're like, well, that's great. That's interesting. Thanks for coming out. And then, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks later, they called me up and they're like, look, we changed our mind. And by the way, I have a lot of gratitude for some of my internal contacts there. One namely that has had my back. If you guys are not out there building relationships, you're just fools, right? Like anyone that's listening, if you're not getting deep with the people and you think that it can all be business modeled out on an Excel spreadsheet, you're just being foolish. Like, I'm not saying that's the only thing you do is go out and wine and dine people. I'm not much for that either, but building legitimate, strong relationships with these companies, whether it be the domain you're buying or whether it be, and I'm not a domainer, let's be clear, but it translates so simply, but there's people, you're dealing with people, right? So I think I did a good job building those relationships, and I got them to see, like, this is a passionate entrepreneur. The guy's fucking all in. Can we really just, like, fuck this guy right now? Can we really do that as human beings? And I feel like, I don't know if they said that, but I feel like that's what I was trying to do in my phone calls and my communications with them. Not like feel sorry for me, but it was like, really? You're going to do Are you going to do this? Are you sure you want to do this?
Is your alternative better than doubling down on me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're going to ask your question, I think, Andrew. But
no, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, they called me back with an offer that made a lot more sense. And we won't get into the exact numbers, but it made a lot more sense. My wife and I have done well. We're entrepreneurs. We had the money. I negotiated a little bit more, which in retrospect was probably foolish, but it worked out. And we wound up buying.
Is this the first time that they talked about you buying it instead of, so there was no conversation about them keeping it?
No, they wanted to sell it.
That was absolutely done. That was not part of your pitch to get them to keep doing it. It was just sell it to me. So when you flew out there, you were more about sell it to me, but not at that price?
No, when I flew out there, it was more about we're undercapitalized. I'd like for you guys, I like them as partners, and you guys should write a check, continue with the deal we have, maybe take a little bit more, but this business is undercapitalized, and I know it, given the spreadsheets that we created.
Okay.
It would cost too much money to get to where we wanted to go in that time frame.
Okay. So you weren't surprised that they called back still on their trajectory of sale only, but it made sense given your presentation and your passion that they lowered the price.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, the option on the table was really honestly never for me to buy it, because I honestly did not think, I thought the domain was worth, I thought it was worth what they were asking, candidly. And I knew I couldn't afford it, candidly. And the only path forward to me then was, well, let's be partners. Keep it, please keep it. Don't sell it, because I can make it work. That was the path. But then after they had their things internally and a lot of stuff happened, I guess behaviors changed on their side, and they just started selling stuff.
Okay. I have another question. So you said they were divesting really because of a lack of focus. They were trying to refocus. Was there a financial crunch for them as well?
I don't particularly know. They're a publicly held company, so you could probably look into that. My thing is I thought the domain price they were asking, me not knowing much about domains, but doing a little bit of research through this process, it was probably fair. And I thought that
this is what I want to dig into. So I want to understand, how did you think about the value, right? I know what it sounds like, is you held up your finger and said, well, banks.com, seems like it's worth that. Was there any math that went into this? Was there any baseline? Did you look for comparable domain sales? Where was your framework? Like, what was the seed for your framework in thinking about this?
So the seed for my framework was strictly on the market opportunity, on the market opportunity and what other companies in this space are worth. That was my framework. It wasn't about, did someone buy a different domain as a domain sale that looks similar for $10 million? Like, it was never that. It was all about, look, I wish I could afford that price tag under 5 million, but over 2, because this is $100 million business. You guys got to fucking understand, this is $100 million business. I would happily pay that. It's worth that. But I looked at it as a market. I didn't look at it relative to other, and I have a whole sheet of competitors that I had run competitive analysis on, like Lending Tree buys this company for 30 million. Lending Tree buys another company for 25 million. Red Ventures buys Bankrate for 1.2 billion. Quinn Street's buying companies for tens of millions of dollars. I'm like, I'll pay it. I don't have it. It's worth it. But we got to develop it, which costs money. Right? So
there's two lessons there that I think are really important for domain investors. So
Drew, I can't hear you.
You don't hear me?
Oh, I do now. Sorry, must
okay.
have been my connection.
So there's two lessons there that I think are really important particularly for domain investors. One is deal structure. So, budget and deal structure. So, in my experience, nearly on a daily basis, the biggest thing we run into is, wow, I wish you luck. What a domain name. Wish I could afford it, but I just can't. Right. And I would say up until recently, that basically meant a hard no. And more recently, we're closing those deals because we're structuring, where we have a willing seller, structuring these deals in completely, I don't even want to say innovative, because these are things that are used all the time in various asset classes, including real estate. But, a lease to own or a lease with an exclusive option to buy, gives you, as an entrepreneur, says, look, here's the price I need for this to make sense. I'm sitting on it. It's doing nothing. And, give me some money so that you've got skin in the game. You seem like a hotshot entrepreneur. You're going to go out there and bust your ass because you've got your money on the line. So give me a little money so you got skin in the game. Pay me a little monthly so that, I'm generating cash flow that's in some way, relative to the value of the name. In my experience, between a half a point and 2 points a month. Bigger you go, the lower the percentage per month, generally speaking. And here's the price I need, and it might seem like a crazy number, but you've got 5 years to go build that business on a lease. If you fail, you walk away, no harm, no foul. You gave it a shot.
A smarter guy. You walk away a smarter person.
You walk away with an MBA. So, and then 5 years from now, it's really a 0 or 100. Either you've got a business, and the scale of the business idea on day one needs to be commensurate with the value of the domain that we're assigning, right? So, if you want to start a lemonade stand and you say, well, I just would love to own lemonade.com, 5 years from now, even if your business is a raging success, unless you've got a lemonade stand in front of every house in America, it doesn't warrant having lemonade.com. So
correct.
If you've got a business that's commensurate with the value of the name at hand, and you can get, enough skin in the game for the domain owner to feel comfortable, you set up a lease that's, a half a point to 2 points per month, which should be, more or less what it's going to cost for you to keep your floors clean. Okay.
Yep.
And 5 years later, you've either got a business that this shouldn't even be a factor, or even if it's a factor, it's clearly, it's a no-brainer at 5 years to buy that thing out. And if it's not, you probably should change businesses anyways, right? So you got no downside except for the monthly lease, which you're going to pay if you go, I start an ice cream shop. You're going to pay, probably that much. If you're in a popular city, in a popular neighborhood, you're going to pay $2 to $5 grand a month just to have your ice cream shop, right?
Yep.
Baseline. Never mind the people, never mind the ice cream. So, or the air conditioning, right? So, those are models that have sort of changed that game. So, 1.1, point two, I forgot point two. What was point two?
I don't know what point two was going to be, but I think you needed point three, which was the relationship aspect as well, because you really need to get in the door and get heard to complete a negotiation. And I want to hear more about that. But right now, could you have taken your whole business and instead of it being all the work that you've done instead of it being on banks.com, put it on lemonade.com or on betterbanksforyou.com. Did you consider that at all? Or...
Well, you know what's interesting about that question? The one thing that this has allowed me to do is go all in on the marketplace model and fundamentally change the way I operate all the other businesses that I operate in the companies that I help. So let's take content as an example. Traditionally, I was a paid media guy. You buy a click for $1, you get 3 or 4 back, you're golden, you run a bunch of spreadsheets, the analysts look at it, you buy more words, you write more copy, you're off to the races. That's the kind of guy I've been for like the past, let's say 10 years. I accidentally stumbled on content with banks.com, saw the power of content, and then treated that. I married the quantitative aspects of paid media with the qualitative aspects of content. And I started naming different pieces of the articles. I started doing different things. And now we can quantify with a lot of certainty after only writing 500 articles. I know for sure the predictability of that business. Furthermore, it's allowed me to deconstruct Finder's business or NerdWallet's business or whatever. And then I got to realize, like, holy shit, we need to spend $1 million on content if we want to be successful, which Andrew knew apparently 5 years ago, but I didn't, right? So it's like, oh, bingo. So back to your point, it's like, look, now I'm all in on what I would call network effects and marketplace models, which is truly internet, truly what the internet's for. And I wasn't thinking about it that way before. Mm-hmm. And now I'm all in on every problem I see now gets hit with this marketplace hammer. And if I can't hit it with the marketplace hammer, I don't even want to play because there's no scale. There's no defensibility. Now back to your point, Tess, if we were to apply that to lovemyhomeloans.com or, whatever, you could do the same thing, but you couldn't do it as fast and you couldn't do it as well, and it wouldn't be as defensible because the domain is the deal, right? So whether consciously or subconsciously, if I knew that or not going into this, that is the pitch. The pitch is everybody knows this name. You can't go to Italy. You can't go to France. You can't go to Zimbabwe. You can't go to Cambodia. You can't go to fucking Compton and nobody knows, like everybody knows what a bank is. They just know. So back to your point before, Drew, about what is the sword you're carrying? Like, dude, fucking use that. Like, what are you doing with that sword? You'd swing that thing, dude, right? And so I have been thinking a lot more deeply about the bigger, like the business model, the bigger picture. How do we build $100 million company that's worth 10x so it's $1 billion valuation instead of, candidly, some of the comps on some of the other guys, which are going to be valued 2 or 3 times revenue. Our model values us at 10 times revenue. And I'm not going to go in and find the keywords anymore. I'm not going to type this stuff out, or you know how to do all that stuff. It's full stop on that. We are on strategy, business model, sharing that vision. And if we can't get that funded, then sayonara. Capital is the lifeblood of these businesses. And if you don't have it, you don't have the right teams with that mixed with that capital, you're not going anywhere. You might as well just wipe your ass with the money.
This was point 2 that I wanted to make was, number 1, deal structure, right? Don't just think about price. Price is, God's honest truth. Nobody listens when I say this, but God's honest truth. My experience, price is the least important factor in these things.
I agree.
If it's the right buyer and it's the right name, the price is the least important factor in closing a deal. You got to make sure you can align the interests and align the, explaining how does the domain fill the need, etc. So deal structure, very important. Secondly, is that what you're talking about with capital. Having the domain name is step 1, right? So when you get approached, somebody says, hey, usually they're coming in, I'm a student, or you got a lawyer, or you got a domain broker, but whoever it is coming in the door, all right, you're assuming, it's an entrepreneur out there that, maybe they've got funding, maybe they don't, but people are thinking about the price and they're thinking, wow, this domain is worth X. And what I think it's really important to understand when you're talking about not the value of the domain, but the price that you're thinking about selling the domain for, is that buying the domain is step 1. which comes back to the conversation we had earlier. It's like, you think, oh, I'm banks.com. I'm going to throw 500 grand at this thing and we're off to the races. But, the reality is okay, don't get me wrong. Owning banks.com, you're not on this podcast and you don't even have a horse in the race if you don't own banks.com, right? Full stop, right? So it's a big step, but it's step one. And what comes next is the development. And the development can cost as much or more than the domain itself. And that is a huge risk for the entrepreneur or the company. And so, because it is in this world, you can throw as much money as you want at a thing, and there's just an absolute uncertainty when it comes to Google and how Google is going to treat your domain name. So these are things that are really important, and I think they're interconnected because deal structure allows the entrepreneur, allows the company to de-risk some of that uncertainty and elongate that cost structure where, the uncertainty is decreasing this way, while at the same time your business is growing this way, hopefully, right? And if it's not, you're going to cancel anyways. So you got these two conflating curves that when they meet, it's a beautiful thing.
But you need capital to sit at that table, right? And the one thing I've learned is
somebody at the table has to have capital.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody.
You need capital for you to sit at the table. It doesn't matter whose it is, but
yes, somebody at the table's got to have the capital.
Yeah, because candidly, it's hard to do this stuff. It's really, really hard to do this stuff, and you're going to pivot
around, and an idea will get you nowhere.
Yeah, and you know what?
It'll get you in the poorhouse. You'll end up borrowing against the domain, and then you're going to end up owing the money. And now you still don't have a business model. You still don't have cash flow. You're deeper and deeper in this thing. So, anyways, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. What I'm trying to do is highlight to people that, because I think a lot of people in the domain industry in particular, they get an amazing domain and they say, I'm going to build a business on this. I know what this can be. Yeah. I've got a great idea for this. Well, that's great. And I think that's wonderful. But, think about that for 24 hours and then tuck that domain away in your portfolio and move on to the next one. Because the reality is, unless you're prepared to throw a lot of capital at it, you're just better off treating it as an investment and moving on.
Or is this really your life's work, right? Do you really truly believe that I will go live in my car. I will see this through, right? And if you don't have that kind of conviction, like you better fucking do what Drew said, because if you're not willing to throw $5,000 at something to write a plan, or you're not willing to work with someone to spend, you're not even out of the gate. Like you have to be all in. And if you're not all in, flip it, sell it. Honestly. Yeah. Sell it.
Exactly. I'm laughing because this morning I was watching this video. It's kind of old. It happened, back in the last time Bitcoin was running up to parabolic growth. And there was this, bleach blonde dude, kind of looked like he, taking a few too many drugs. But anyways, he was interviewed by the news, and he was living in a treehouse on like an empty piece of land. He's like, I pay no rent. I'm living in a treehouse, but he's worth millions. And they're like, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? And he goes, yeah, well, I'm willing to live in this treehouse because I know that, I just want to spend all the money I've got. I'm going to just keep throwing at Bitcoin because I have so much conviction in this thing that I'm willing to live in a treehouse, until that conviction comes to fruition. And, it's not different running a business. It's like you said, are you willing to live in your car until you can make it a success?
Yeah. It's hard work.
If you don't have that conviction, go back to the domain forums and start flipping.
I feel like the two of you are a spectacular match. I have a question for both of you from coming the other way. Drew, as you're saying, the domain name is step one. I understand what you're saying, that people need to be aware that there is a step two that is frequently more expensive than step one. But I also want to hear both of your thoughts on, must the domain name decision be step one because of how it will influence the cost and effectiveness of effort in the following steps?
No, well, you could be bankrate.com, right? And domain name was not step one, right? Of course, it is step one because they're a website. You can't have step two without having the domain name. But the point being, in the business plan, the domain name is not step one. They have a business plan, and Bankrate just happened to become the brand, right? If you want to go out and compete with somebody like that, and you don't have, tens of millions of dollars, then yes, arguably, unless you've got a secret sauce, I think that a domain name is the biggest sword out there for an entrepreneur to get a leg up, to be able to compete and punch above their weight.
Yes.
So I think it is an absolute must step one, if that's the environment you're trying to compete in. Because again, right, we're not even having this conversation if you're not banks.com.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and look, we talked about it earlier. Anyone will take my call. Now,
Yep.
that I'm not using that, by the way, until I know that it's important, because the minute you fuck that up,
Yes.
they will never forget that the guy from banks.com is a jackass, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or they will never forget that the guy from
He's a
banks.com.
midget behind the curtain.
No, so I've been laying low literally for 2 years because I know how these people are going to react. I've done a lot of research. I've got my numbers. There's certain places that we have to make traction and we can talk about. There's other things that happen. But if you use that sword too often or too soon, you're actually going to do more damage than good, in my opinion.
And without a sharp edge.
Yeah.
Right? Don't come swinging with a blunt sword.
Yeah. And so the domain by itself, this might be controversial, but like the domain by itself is like, it's not worthless, but it's near, you don't make money just by having a domain unless you sell it to someone like for more than you bought it. So if the domain just doesn't print cash.
Yes. But what it does is it makes each dollar that you spend more valuable than your competitors'
More
same
effective.
dollar.
Yes.
It converts better.
Yes.
And it goes further. And, you're a paid marketing guy, right? So, in paid media, that's a sunk cost. You pay for that customer. You have a certain conversion rate. They come, they convert, and that's it. They're gone. And if you have a strong brand and you're in an industry that warrants repeat business, there's a stickiness to these things. And so each dollar you spend continues to pay a dividend.
Yep.
And there's a certain retention number which doesn't exist in the paid media unless you've got that brand in association with the paid media.
Yep.
And so it alone, the domain name is just a domain name. It's an asset. It's a great asset, right? And you might be able to sell it for more than you paid. Great. But if you're talking about it from a business context, again, it's step one. And the way to look at it is what that domain does is it extends every dollar that you spend further than your competition. And that margin is your moat.
Yep.
And over time, that moat gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it compounds. Like I said, every dollar you spend is paying a dividend in retention and higher conversion rates, and you're just incrementally increasing that margin against your competitor. And then over time, that little trickle turns into a river, and you've got a really strong moat around your castle. And that's the way to think about what a domain does for a business, a domain like banks.com. If you are committed, it's not the short term, make all end all. It's if you've got a great business plan and you're committed and you've got the conviction and the capital, it will over time build you a moat around your castle that nobody else can compete with without outspending you by whatever factor you've created in that moat.
Yeah, your click-through rates are higher because you have an immediate built-in trust. You can control the narrative. You can, honestly, you can control the whole goddamn space. You can command the whole entire space that you exist in if you can do this right? Your click-through rates are higher, which means your CPCs are lower, right? Your conversion rates are higher because you have more trust. Like, it is just it's a really, really great thing. But you got to do the work. You still got to do the work. This shit doesn't just fall out of the tree houses. Like Bitcoin guy. I hope he
like Bitcoin. Okay, so now you get the phone call. This is such a good story, Chris. And you have so many fantastic insights. And Drew, you know you do too. But so Chris, so you get the phone call. You've flown out there. You've pitched them, kind of hoping to just keep things going more or less as is. And they call you back, and instead of somewhere vaguely between 2 and 5 million, ...
Well, it was less than that. And then, maybe foolishly on my part, but I got to tell you, I didn't, I figured if they had come down that much, then maybe I could get a little more, which, by the way, back to Drew's point earlier, that was stupid on my part. That was, in retrospect, that was really dumb. Now, the tactic, though, I think...
Not dumb, risky.
Risky, yes. I think the tactic, though, that I used was smart, because I didn't say, do this for me without me doing something for you. And it was at the end of the year, and I said, look, if that's the number, I need to go talk about it because I got to raise the money, right? But I didn't need to raise the money. But I got to raise the money. I have to have some conversations. But if I can do this, would you be willing to consider another discount if I was able to get you the money next week by the 15th? Let me think about it, right? So there was a little bit of back and forth there. So I did wind up, shaving a little bit off the price, which then created even more buyer's remorse later, wondering if I could have gotten more, which is, again, maybe a little bit, maybe not foolish, but maybe pushing it a little bit too much. But, I wanted to do the best thing for my family and my business. And I already had $700,000 into this mofo, 750 or some stupid thing. And now I was going to be in well over, I was going to be in a lot more than that. And so I was just kind of like, fuck, man, where's this going? So anyway, that's how it happened. So we got it. We nailed it down. We bought it in December of 2018. And then to readdress the team thing, now that deal, that like 20-page master services agreement and all the numbers and all the metrics that we were on the treadmill for, it was like a huge load off my back.
Yeah.
So I immediately pulled out the other sword and just got rid of just everything. I think we were burning $40,000, $50,000 a month. I was just like, fuck this. We're getting this thing down to nothing, and I need to think. Now that it's ours, like, we don't need to remodel the house. We don't need to do anything. We need to cut these costs now, and we all need to take a step back. And we need to now think very succinctly about the next 5 years with no pressure. We need to do the right thing, no pressure, no investment, no nothing. We just need to go build what we're supposed to build now. And that's kind of what we did. So,
it's not the popular opinion, and it's not the popular way to go about business these days, but I have bootstrapped every business I own, and there's a lot to be said for it, man. I sleep well at night, even in the businesses that aren't doing well. I sleep well at night because I don't owe any money to anybody, and that is huge. And I know not everybody has that ability or that luxury, and it depends on the type of business you're trying to target and how big you're trying to go. But it's so interesting to me because it fits with my belief system and the way I run businesses, that, the moment that master services agreement is out the window, the moment that you don't have that chain around your neck, first thing you do is you say, okay, I'm going to cut expenses. And so, I look at that and I think, should have cut expenses earlier, right? But this is the thing. When somebody else has a noose around your neck and somebody else is driving the train, and you're just the engine, you don't think clearly. You don't do things the way that you would do it if it was,
100% you.
100% you, But the moment it is 100% you think, I don't need to do this. I'm about burning cash for no reason here, right? I'm burning cash to achieve somebody else's objective.
Yeah.
So anyways, I just wanted to make that point because that's the way I've run my businesses. There's people that started at the exact same time that have much bigger businesses because they leveraged.
Yeah.
But I bet I sleep better at night.
Yeah. Well, you don't, it depends like where you are in life and where you want to go. Like for me, it was like, look, I don't know if scoreboard's the right analogy, but I feel like there is, I'm 44 years old and I want to build a big, meaningful company. I really want to do that. And I think I'm capable of doing that. In this journey that I've been on for literally my entire life, starting at Gateway, right? And even mowing lawns door to door with a push mower when I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
You evolve, right? You evolve. And I don't want to be Jeff Bezos. Like that's insane, right? I'm not an egomaniac. I don't drive Ferraris. I don't care about that stuff. I'm a family guy, but I do want to, build something bigger than a $5 million company, which I've done before. I'd like to build a $20 million, $50 million, $100 million company and just enjoy the level that I think I've earned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of grinding away on stuff that candidly someone maybe 20 years my junior should be doing, and I should be out doing deals and promoting a company that employs 500 people instead of 5. Right?
Yeah, I can't talk to you about that. I'm not the right guy to give any advice on that subject. I'm still a guy doing everything I shouldn't be doing, and somebody 20 years my junior should be doing, and I should be delegating everything. And
I still do it all too. But it's my dream to get out of it.
I'm still, it's like I'm still sharpening my pencils.
But it's my dream to get out of it, I guess. It's like, I feel like, and by the way, I think when you get to places, you think, well, like where you got is where you wanted to be. And then you realize maybe I was better off It's
all about the journey.
Yeah.
It's all about the journey. If you can't lean in and embrace the journey, you're on the wrong path.
I agree.
That's it.
I think this is such a great conversation. Chris, I know we booked you for about 10 more minutes. Do you have a little extra time or not so much?
I do. I've got.
I actually do have to slide as well, though. So we're going to have to sort of bring it around. But this is an awesome conversation. There's just so many lessons here. So basically, we've got multiple iterations of banks.com, multiple approaches and perspectives on what it should be, how it should execute. I think I've heard, 2 didn't go as planned, and now you're in your 3rd iteration. You've got a clear business plan around building a marketplace, and now you want to go out and raise the capital so that you can, in fact, compete with, the players in that space. Is that accurate?
And right now you're 2 years into your 5-year plan that you developed.
I mean, let's be clear. Like I bought the domain in December of 2018. So candidly, the first start in putting
you're less than 2 years into this thing.
I would say I'm a year into this thing. Like literally, 2019 is when we kind of reset the clock, and even as little as 6 months ago is when I started looking at the real problems that customers face. And when I say customers, I mean the banks. There's 5,000 of them. Do you know how many of them LendingTree has? Not even 500. Why? Why is there a huge part of the marketplace that's gone completely untapped, right? It's because their business model doesn't allow them to serve the entire ecosystem. Well, guess what? If you're banks.com, you can't say we have every bank on the planet. We're going to help you shop and find stuff for banks, and you don't have every bank on the planet, and you treat some banks differently than you treat other banks because they pay because they can afford to pay, and other banks can't pay because they can't afford to pay because they're community banks. That's not fair, and that's not right, right? So for me,
that's a question for free market capitalism, right? I'd argue,
I would just say it's not aligned with your strategy and mission statement.
Yeah.
This is a rabbit hole that I don't want to go down right now, but very much on that point, I think that's free market capitalism, at its best. And I think that a lot of those small banks who either their business model is not to try and attract customers from the greater market, it's just local banks, or whether it's, whatever reason they're not listed, right? Whatever reason they're not connecting to these marketplaces, they're not going to exist anymore.
Yeah.
They're going away, right? In a world of zero interest rates, 0% interest rates, that bank, that small bank that isn't trying to address a wider market, he doesn't exist anymore. Probably in the next 24 months, a big portion of those banks are not going to exist anymore. So, I think that there's this confluence of factors that is going to make big banks bigger and small banks not exist anymore. And I think that, looking at the marketplace of why is bank rate to have 400 to 500, and I'm just using the numbers that I think you also were just kind of pulling out. Why don't they have the 5,000 banks? And I think it's an analogy for the real world of, the weaker are going to get weaker, the stronger are going to get stronger. I think that, that's the new mountain coming back full circle. That's the new mountain. We're climbing a new mountain because all of this stuff is changing. Banks.com could be very well suited, to Sherpa up the next mountain. But I do think that those small banks are going to be in a world of hurt.
Yep. Well, I think you're right. There's asset classes in that group that I think you're absolutely right. And there's asset classes in that group that I think our consumer preferences have changed, and they're leaning in on communities, and they're leaning in on, giving back. And, we're in a different time from a consumer preference standpoint as well. So there is but here's the good news. It doesn't matter if some of those banks fail and other of those banks win, because I'm here to just have everybody on the playground, right? It doesn't bother me, right?
Yeah.
And I think with our business model innovation, which everybody really loves, like our business model innovation allows us to be more inclusive and widen the marketplace rather than everyone fighting over the same banks always at the top, which I think, back to your point earlier in the show, we're not going to compete with those guys that way. We're not going to, we don't have 60 million unique visitors every month right now. We can't.
Go build a blue sea.
Yeah, right.
Blue ocean.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing. It's a platform. It's a marketplace. I believe I think it's a more inclusive marketplace, but that's business model driven, right? It's not pay to play.
Who's your ideal capital partner? What kind of capital partner are you looking for banks.com?
Well, I think, capital nowadays, based on what I understand, and I've been looking at it closely, money is free right now. You said that at the beginning of the show, and candidly, I've talked
It's free for those who have it, and it's very expensive for those who don't. Correct.
So look, I think that, I'm going on a pretty hard push. I've already had some conversations, with some VCs and seed funds. We're not A yet because I haven't proven that this new business model can translate from one industry, which is already very proven, translate from one industry to another. So I think we're in the A round. We'll probably, look for a strategic partner. And I've had conversations with some of the larger guys because I don't think they have the will or the skill to try to do what I'm doing. And your point earlier, the banks.com domain is something that you can't have that. I have that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So
and there's only one. That's the beauty of these things.
So if I get 10 customers under my new model, candidly, I mean, the model to become a $50 million business in less than 5 years is 1,000 customers. But if I can get 10, I can get 100. If I can get 100, I can get 1,000. So if I prove this model within the next 6 months, which this is a relatively new thing for us because we didn't want to go head to head with all these guys and act like the same company because we're not. If I can do that, I think like within the next 18 months, we're kind of done here, So does that make sense? Venture, not private equity, no bank, quote unquote, oddly, I've talked to banks about this. They're like, what? I'm like, dude, I have an asset. Lend me money against my asset. They're like, I don't know what that fucking thing is worth. I'm like, all right, I'm talking to the wrong people, you know?
So you know, maybe we can wrap on this, but I just listened to a really fascinating podcast this morning. I'm a subscriber to Real Vision, realvision.com. In my opinion, single best piece of finance media on the planet. Economics, macroeconomics, finance, all aspects of finance. And they had a fascinating, it's a shame I don't, maybe I have it open here. No, I don't. I think, anyways, it was a podcast with an expert in sort of alternative asset securitization.
Got it.
When I say alternative asset, these are pretty mainstream assets, but alternative meaning not, traditional risk assets like equities, bonds, et cetera. And, he was talking about the securitization of, in this high risk environment where things are seemingly, very inflated, and it's very difficult to find yield. It's very difficult to find any return that's risk adjusted. And he's going out and he's packaging up, risk assets. So it could be like, a pool of cars owned by a car rental business. Their business is renting cars. Their business is the marketing. Their business is the rentals. They know how to do that, right? They got it down pat. They got a brand. They got the funnel to drive the customers, et cetera. What their business isn't is financing a fleet of autos, right? And so he'll go in and he'll buy up a fleet of autos, and he'll, basically do whatever. I don't know what the logistics of that deal look like, but he's basically, he's the guy, he has money. So for him, money's free. So he has a very low cost of capital. He can go out and borrow money, buy a fleet of cars for much cheaper than the business could finance that fleet of cars. And then he can then lend money to the business at cheaper than they could have, finance the cars, but more than he can. And so he can make a margin there. And it's a securitized loan, but it's treated more like a bond. And it's, it's a really interesting sort of emerging asset class. And I think that it can be applied to many things. And it was the first time I heard anybody really say in much more intelligent words than I've ever, what I think the future of domain names could look like, which is that, of course, it doesn't make sense for some startup to buy a domain for $1 million or $5 million. That's not what you do, right? You've got an idea, you're building a team, you need to market it, da, da, da. What you need is somebody who has a very low cost of capital and a long time horizon, who says, I will finance this asset, and then you go build a business on it. And when the time comes, you buy it out, or you just keep paying me a royalty, or, a lease, or whatever it is you want to call it. But it works in that way. And I think that would have been the ideal business partner for you, right? That would be the ideal business partner for virtually every entrepreneur that sees a banks.com and says, I have a vision. I have the time, the skills, and the energy to go out and build the business that needs to be on that domain. But I don't have the capital to do it. And I think this is the model. This is not just for domains, but
I agree with that 100%, because candidly, if we don't make it when that capital runs out, then assuming, the guy takes all his cars back and he either sells them and gets his money back because there's an asset there,
totally. It's collateralized.
Banks.com, analogy, as long as, everybody's clear about the terms. It's like, look, if you really want to keep going, there's a way to do this. And if you fail, the domain's gone anyway. So you want to take a shot at it? Or if you don't want that, then why don't you just sell the domain anyway, right? Just sell it and take the fucking money, right? I think that's, and then whoever owns these alternative assets, AKA domains, they just keep giving them to someone until someone figures out how to make it work, right? I think that's a good idea.
And then ultimately that scales, right? Ultimately, then you've got some kind of like a real estate investment trust that suddenly, instead of owning a bunch of real estate, that, They own a bunch of domains. They own a huge portfolio of domains. Some of them are leased out. Some of them are they're lending against them. Some of them are, whatever. But that creates an ecosystem that's good for everybody. It creates incredible efficiencies. So I'm sorry to sidetrack that, but as I'm listening to you and I listened to that podcast this morning, it's like so clear to me that that's the future. Of course, that's how it should look like. Ultimately, banks should be the one doing that lending, but they don't understand, and they're very slow to adapt. So,
yep. Well, capital, again, I think capital. I mean, I think there's teams that are capable. We are one of them, but you need to sit at that table, right? You sit at that table in Vegas, and if you show up to that fucking table with $100, why don't you just go to the buffet or just go buy a shitload of Jack Daniels? Because you're not going to be there for long, right?
Yeah.
So you better show up ready to go to sit there for 6 or 7 hours and actually do some winning. And if you have any other expectations, go get drunk, right? It's like,
exactly.
No point. Let's go to a show. Anyway, thanks for that, Andrew. That was, we'll have to have a discussion about that. I'll look up Real Vision as well.
So I think the guy's name
again,
is
I think there's
Rutledge.
an awful lot more you could talk about in particular.
The guy's name is Tom Rutledge. Tom Rutledge with Magnetar Capital. Anyways, very, very interesting interview. Securitization during insecure times is the title of the interview on the Real Vision platform.
Excellent. Love it.
Chris, this was awesome. I love banks.com. It's one of those names. It's like you said, I don't care where you go in the world. You say banks.com, they know what's up. You know what I mean? There's no explanation. We were on a DomainSherpa last week, maybe, we were talking about, it was like, I think it was Jotham Frakes on Friday on the Domain Name Social. He had he had created a graph that showed the number of seconds it takes you to explain a domain name is directly correlated with the value of that domain name. And so if it takes you 0 seconds to explain that domain name, the value on the graph is, way up and to the left. And then if well, I don't know which one is the X and which one's the Y axis. I'm too far out of school and too stupid. But let's say this is the X axis. The longer you get down on that time frame, the X axis, the value just goes to 0, right?
Yep.
So it takes you 5 minutes to explain your domain name. Your domain is worthless.
Yes.
Right? Banks.com, it takes 0 seconds to explain that domain name. So it's a very valuable domain name. So I hope that you raise that capital, and I hope that you can introduce a new model to that market, because I think it's needed. And I do think it's an exciting time, because even though, the really boom times for lead gen in that market was, maybe over 5 or 6 years ago, I think we're entering an entirely new paradigm. And you may be just at the right time where a lot of other people are going to have to retool, right? Margin, hard to make a margin, when interest rates are 5%, and if you're going to say your margin's 10%, there's money there. When interest rates are 0, 10% of 0 is still 0, right? So that's not actually true. That's not how the math works. But the point is just that, as interest rates are so low, it's very difficult for the banks to create margin, and therefore what they'll pay for a lead goes down.
That's right.
And so I think that we're looking at an environment where the industry is ripe for retooling. You might just be perfect with timing. And so I hope you get the capital, and I hope you can go throw, some spaghetti against the wall and see if this sticks. But I think the timing is super interesting.
Well, Drew, if I don't,
so maybe
I guess you'll be hearing from me, right?
And if it doesn't work, you know who will sell it for you.
I do.
And the good news is that I'm pretty confident that if you give this thing another 2 years, and you don't succeed, which I hope you do, the value over the next 2 years, I think, post-COVID is going to be significantly higher than it is today.
Yeah, I would agree. It's all about hanging on. So I appreciate it, Tess. Drew, I'm really thankful for your time today and having me on your show.
Chris, I respect your focus, your savvy, your authenticity. What a delight.
And the grit. And the grit.
And your wife.
Yes. Well, the grit, there's just no other, maybe they call it dumb enough to try. Who knows? I've been out of school a while too. So we'll just keep plowing forward. That's what we do. So
that's it. Put the blinders on.
That's right. All right, guys. I appreciate your time today.
Cheers.
See you next time.
Chris.
All right. Bye, Chris.